It's too bad we cannot turn off this microphone.
I think you'll want to find it good. I think that might be a whole base.
It really is. There's no three other platforms that have two different hierarchies.
So
That's not original.
Roscoe is you want to add to this. This here street house.
I have this problem where I like
Find out the way
ride the train a lot or whatever, so I just get distracted, so I can download this.
Go back to where Russ was. Yeah, so I think this came before your message. This is because this is if I'm saying what Russ's message is, it doesn't have your message in it, it just has yours. So your analysis is the next thing, because you read this and so Russ,
According to you, your own microphone is picking you up. I'm seeing you on the transcript.
love it.
By a couple of gigs I'm used to, but
Well.
Beep, beep, boop.
Beep. Poop. I like the transcription.
Yeah, it's kind of close.
In the old days, I was complaining to Len about, well, why does your first CPU board have just one name?
Good to see you. I'm well. How are you today?
Are you back to taking more notes?
Like yesterday's notes.
They were perfect.
Does it show I used to take notes?
That was larger than Quran.
I hadn't thought of it that way. But
Yeah.
Lovely people, we're going to start this session.
Kind of my first
Order.
obvious name.
Order.
Plus,
As long as you had it.
German order.
the FBI prototype report in summer 89.
Mr. Folk, may the floor be in order. Is that even an expression? I don't think
the
so.
floor will be ever in your favor. Is that what you're looking for? You have the hair for that.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the GROW Working Group session at IETF 117 in San Francisco. A warm welcome to the remote participants. We appreciate that you're here virtually, wherever you are on this fine planet. Before we continue, I want to point everybody at the note well. The note well includes guidance on how to treat each other with respect, which we find important here, but also that it is mandatory for you to fill in the blue sheets by scanning the QR code to indicate your presence in this room. So if you have not yet scanned the QR code on your phone, please do so now. Here's a bunch of online resources related to the Global Routing Operations Working Group. For those that just walked into the room, please scan the QR code to indicate your presence. We have a mailing list that is fairly easy to manage in terms of traffic volume. There is some outdated links to our minute keeping system and the Jabber server, so we should update this slide. So we've covered blue sheets through the QR code. We need a minute taker.
Sue said she's going to do minutes. We just give her a minute. So everyone pause.
I'll catch up.
Let's all stare.
Sue Harris, thank you so much for your volunteer services. We need a Jabber scribe. I'll assign myself and monitor the Zulip chat room. And then we need to bash the agenda. The agenda today is a quick overview of some drafts that recently saw activity. Then Paulo Lucenti will present on BMP things. Jeff Haas will talk about BGP attribute propagation. Pierre will talk about BMP, and Maxine will also talk about BMP. Are we missing anything that somebody sent slides that they want to present today? I don't think so. Good. And with that, I'm going to try and open up. No, let's do draft status. There is a working group document that outlines a BGP community in the well-known category to indicate anycastness. The authors of this draft indicated that they would like to proceed to working group last call, but at the same time, in the last few weeks, I saw two messages to the GROW mailing list expressing a little bit of concern that it's not entirely clear what to do with the community and if there's perhaps an angle of abuse in setting the community in inappropriate situations, whereby it's not clarified what inappropriate exactly could be. So I want to encourage the working group to add to that mail thread about the BGP Anycast community. And if I don't see any activity in the next few weeks, I will start working group last call to force everybody's attention to that draft. Other draft status. Is anybody waiting on the chairs to review or shepherd something at this point in time? Usually Paulo has a to-do item for me. Okay, you're gonna do it in your, great. I'm gonna try and keep track of the to-do items for us.
Hello, Camilo Cardona. So I didn't want to make a presentation for this, but I sent to the mailing list the latest that we uploaded, the latest draft for the BMP Young module. The draft, we intended it, I mean, the document now is much filled with details, the design choices. We try to add examples for everything. So, I mean, we are in the point in which please read the document. I mean, I hope we don't have to make more presentations about it, or we will, but there's enough content there so that you can read the document and complain. I mean, just go and complain. I mean, if you find something that you don't want, if you find that the design choices are wrong, perfectly, but just go and read it, please, and send feedback. Yeah, that's.
Did you already make a pass through the Young doctors?
I was hoping that we could have some more I mean, if somebody can read it from the list and have more insights or does not agree with something, that will be great to have it now before the Young doctors take a look, which when they take a look, they will probably try to make the model fit the design choices a bit better, or they will have complaints about it. So I think it's better that the group reads like our insights and our design choices, and if there's any complaint about it, that we hear them at the beginning and not at the end when the draft is about to be called for last call, if that ever happens in the.
Right. Is there anyone in the room that has in-depth familiarity with Yang that wants to volunteer to provide review on the BMP Yang model? Yeah, so,
No,
so
Jeff-
you're,
Jeff-
you're
Jeff
out.
has
You
been-
already did it.
Yeah, Jeff has been very helpful. I'm not.
Anyone else?
Well, if anybody works with BMP practically in their network and just, I mean, it's just that. I mean, they don't have to be experts in Yang. They just have to have BMP running on their network and say, hey, that's what I want. Is in the draft. And I think the draft is, I hope it's clear enough that you don't have to know Yang because there are examples, there's everything. Just make sure that what you want is there. And if the draft is too complex because there are too many things, you can also say that. But I mean, finding the balance is complicated. I mean, that's all what I wanted to say.
All right, thank you. Any other status updates people are wondering about? Then we shall proceed to the first presentation. Paulo, why don't you come forward and enlighten us? Which one is it? We have everything in duplicate.
The names are really hard now.
Hello.
All right, one second,
It's
we'll try and
pure
find
up message namespace, right? So we just see what happens if we share this?
Yeah.
Nice.
Yes. So I rehashed 1 second this draft that was from John, and it was there. It expired. Quite simple kind of draft. Like there is, the init message and the peer-up message in BMP. They are sharing the same namespace, and so John had the idea to split them, because it's just a good idea. So what happened is that we were working in the meanwhile with Lockrib and Adjeribout, so we were touching that specific registry. And so back in the days, I volunteered myself to help out John, like to, first we do the these two drafts, and then I will help out, untangling the whole thing. So next slide, please. Next slide, please. So this is how it looks like right now, the BMP initiation and peer-up information, so the conglomerate for the two ones. So next slide. What I was thinking is, we have a BMP initiation information TLV with 0, 1, and 2. And then next slide, please. The BMP peer-up, we have the 0, 3, and 4. And probably it would be a good idea, it's not in the draft yet, but to reserve the code points that are not being used or migrated to the other registry, just, to be clearer. But so it's quite a simple thing. There is nothing special from the very beginning. I think it's just good, and it makes the protocol a little bit more polished up. So that was it about this draft. I don't know if there is any comments, anything about it. No? Next slide. Thank you. So we go to the TLV EBIT draft. Here, I will not rehash, as always, what this is about. I think I've been talking enough about it. There was essentially one just piece of action item to do there. Next slide, please. And second, again. It was that, Ahmed, thank you, Ahmed, for the feedback. So he was clearly pointing out that we use those code points very high for experimental use, and that was clashing with the fact that we used the topmost bit for the EBIT, right? And so essentially, like in the draft, I simply put there that, experimental, so those were reserved for experimental, but EBIT in the end, it's also for experimenting around stuff. It's just a different mechanism and a little bit more, let's say, codified, let's say. And so essentially, like, I propose to remove these code points for experimental, and we'll only leave 65.535 as reserved, and that's it. So this is the only thing that changed in between the last meeting and this one. I think it's kind of a straightforward thing to do. Ahmed, I see he approves. We discussed it on the mailing list. There was also on the mailing list not really any opposition, but I don't know if any comments, feedback on this. No. Then next slide. Hey, thanks, Ben. Oh yeah, and maybe the last item for the EBIT draft is just that the EBIT maybe it's applicable to stats types as well. I think so. Yes, I bag a number of yes, 3 yes, 4 yes. Okay, cool. I will do that. Perfect. Thank you very much. Next slide, please. So yeah, this is the TLV draft. Also this one I will not provide the background because I've been talking a lot about it. Also, there has been no progress since the last meeting, but I wanted just to present the next slide, please. What is remaining to do essentially. So 2 items. One, I would say probably pretty easy is to, stateless parsing. There was, a TLV bit where I was saying, this is for add path. And I received enough feedback that, doing the add path in the TLV is not a good thing. People really like the flag of add path. The flag is not there. So maybe we can do, just a super quick and easy draft adding the flag of add path, right? And so we forget this whole stateless parsing TLV thing. I am enough convinced from the feedback that I received, this is the good way to go. But the other thing, and here we come to the chairs. There has been enough conflicting feedback on what to do, whether we want to bump the version to version 4 of BMP in order to support this new semantic of the, for the root monitoring, or we want to use a new message type. I don't know, we want to call it TLV, root monitoring or whatever. Now, authors prefer the current way, so which is to bump the version. Why is that? It's only philosophical. There is no real advantage, but it's like, BMP's, without TLV support for root monitoring, it's a closed protocol. We have to open the protocol up in order to make it on par with other telemetry protocols than what people do with, if you open the Pandora's box, it's not our, it's not the scope of this draft, but we have to do it, right? It's key for the protocol to be open. And so if you bump the version to 4, then it's like, it is easier for operators to go to vendor and say, hey, do you support version 4 of BMP, right? And when they say no, and they say, I support version 3, then you say, hey, but now there is a new version out there. It's clear, compact, pragmatic, easy. Whereas if you do a new message type, what happens is that you have to say, hey, do you support that new message type? It is, kind of less relevant. It becomes an optional thing, something that, yeah, we can do or not do and whatever, So in the end, there is 0 technical difference, let's say, between one or the other. And the feedback that I received, so there is people that agree to what we are doing, and there is other people that say, hey, but you bump the version, let's say, just because of introducing the TLVs in one message type, right? So I wanted just to straighten that up. I didn't want to take just, I'm expressing what is my preference here. I wanted a position from the chairs as well, because, it seems we are kind of 50-50, so.
Need to flip a coin.
No, so that's the thing. So also this is a good opportunity if somebody has extra feedback, like, we are rehashing this thing. If there is anybody that wants to say something at this point, please say it. Otherwise, I would really like if the chairs would have a position on this.
So before we go there, and since you indicated there's no technical difference between bumping the version or publishing an RFC that extends the current version, this sounds like perfect bike shedding material. Jeff, you are in the queue. I am curious to hear what your perspective is, and then Ben Madison, and maybe others will participate in this conversation to decide what to do.
So what I want to see as a protocol developer, no matter what my protocol is anytime there is a change of the rules, so if I'm expected to pull something new, that's not like an optional TLV out of the queue, the message type has changed, that needs to be clearly signaled somehow. BMP is largely doing that through version numbers right now. So that's one piece of my rule. The second piece of my rule is if you are causing a procedural change in the protocol, events are processed in a different fashion, that also needs to be signaled. And again, BMP, that's where we're doing these things. What I think you're steadily heading towards is the number of places that you need for clean extensibility points are being closed off by TLV. That's good. One of the success criteria I suggest for the chairs as part of this is review the entirety of BMP with the messages and make sure, have I covered everything with a TLV? Have I done all of my extensions? Can I maybe do this and make it all done once? And then, much like BGP stays at version 4 for 30 years, maybe BMP stays at version 4 for next 10 years.
Thank you, Jeff.
So, Jeff, am I understanding you correctly that you're largely in favor of bumping the version number?
Yes, please bump the version number to tell us as a signal that these things have happened. This means that your collectors will be very clear on what the things have changed. And ideally, as part of putting out your document, you have very clearly highlighted, not only in all your normative text, but a very brief summary of, we have made these non-backward compatible changes that we are signaling via this new version number.
Thanks.
Thank you, Jeff.
Ben Madison.
I think it should be green.
All right.
I largely agree with everything that Jeff just said. I think that in keeping with how we've been doing this up to now, bumping the version number is the sensible way to go. And I think that this is fundamental enough to the protocol that this constitutes a new generation of it. I don't think that this is just a feature extension. Introducing it as a new message type begs the question of what do we do with the old message type as well. And I don't see that it makes a lot of sense for people to be stuck implementing both into the future. So I think I think it's fairly obvious that bumping the version is the right call.
Amazing. Thank you, Ben.
Ahmed Al-Hassani from Swisscom. I'm strongly in favor of bumping up the version. Maybe we'll not stabilize at version 4, maybe 6, 7, and then will become like BGP at some point. And also I would add, I would love to see that version bump in the title of the RFC, not just in the text heading. So it's clear signal. So support version 4. Yes, here's an RFC that says version 4, not just TLV, and then someone else have to go to the text and see there's a bump of the version. Thanks.
Thank you. So trick question for you, Paolo. What have opponents of bumping the version number argued? I don't need to know their name, but what have you heard as let's not bump the version?
Oh, simply like it is confusing that you are touching just one message type and then in reality 2 of them, and then just because of that, which is what Ben was saying, it's not really just that. I mean, it's a key thing that we are doing. Then we are bumping the version of all the message types, you know, so that was it. So also there, I would say there is nothing substantial, in my opinion, in the opposition. You know, this is why I wanted to open the floor for discussion, because, you know, I am also humble enough that if there is opposition, but it's substantial, then of course, you know, I take that into consideration. But it has never, you know, been the case. And so philosophy versus philosophy, I was thinking maybe we should, you know, discuss this.
So you want to bump the version number in the common header?
Yes.
And are message types from the old version then still permitted, or is that a clean cut?
Clean cut.
Yeah. Is anybody opposed to bumping the version number in the way that Paolo described? Well, to be thorough, we can send an email to the mailing list to give people a little bit more time to chime in. But my sense from this room and this crowd is that there people look favorably upon bumping the version number.
Amazing. Thank you. Fantastic.
Just to be clear, I think you have to be clear in messages that get sent. We have to be clear in the message that gets sent what the implications of that are. Like, oh, all your current BMP stuff has to be redone if you want to use it in the new version. It also must make the jump in some fashion.
Right. Last bit, like who sends the email? I send the email, the chairs send the email.
I think I've been assigned.
Okay, perfect. Thanks for your volunteer service.
Yeah.
All right. So last bit. This rel bit, the logging for routing events in BMP. Sorry. Next slide, please. So this time I repeat a little bit what is the intuition, because it's maybe the second time that I speak about this, and the last meeting I didn't speak about it. So it's just, you know, I think something very simple as well. So it's like, you know, in BMP we have semantics for let's say doing with the route monitoring to do initial flooding, and then, you know, have you know, a BMP station synchronized to what is the routing table of a router. We have the semantics to do debugging, to have statistics and things like that, session reporting, but we don't have an event-driven semantic, right? So something happens, then let's say just notify me of this thing, right? Because of this, like we were thinking with Camilo, like let's do you know, a new message type, and this is something key to support in a monitoring protocol, you know, being event driven on top of all the other semantics that are already supported. Next slide, please. So what I did in the draft, like in this second version, is essentially straighten up a little bit what are the use cases, and the use cases really fall in three different categories, right? So one is totally like, you know, the differential analysis. So for example, if you have being pre and post policy today, if you want to know what is the difference between the two, you should really take the two full tables to the collector, and then the collector should be, you know, doing the matchmaking or not matchmaking and seeing, okay, this is the diff, for example. But the router already knows what it is filtering, right? So why don't we just export, you know, what is being filtered, you know, from the router, for example. So that would be one thing, support a differential analysis between the different vantage points. The second would be also, you know, reporting the outcome of validation on the router. You know, so we know that routers do RPKI validation, so that is, you know, very clear. But also we have a black holing validation. Like I don't know, for example, we want to know whether you know, somebody that is triggering a black hole is really, you know, allowed to do that or not. So BMP could be, this kind of message type in BMP could be, a great fit for this work. And the third use case is, Camilo came up with this because he was doing some work on it, report just malformed BGP packets, right? So 3 use cases, I think, very, straightforward, very make sense. And, we just straightened them up as part of the last version of the draft. Next slide, please. So yeah, so that's the thing. Like, if there is, I'm very curious if there is interest. There is not interest in this. What do you guys think? Yes, there is one yes from Jeff. The yes from Jeff, it's like 10 yes. So that's yeah. Cool. Yes.
Jeff, so the things that you're having in here are good. One of the interesting connection points you'll have to figure out is these things should have presence in the various Yang models that are going on. So like RTBH, there's no such thing right now like the BGP Yang model. Hey, operators, in this room, you think that belongs there? Well, maybe you should do something about that as an example. RPKI, at the moment, there's no Yang model as best I'm aware of. But at some point there's going to be. I know we're kicking around one internally at Juniper, and I keep hoping that I can haul them here to actually show them what we've done in-house and do a public one. So each of these things, yes, they're great things to have, but let's go ahead and coordinate with the other people that produce these states so that they can be kept in sync.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you for the feedback. Yes. And so that was it from my side. Thank you. Thank you very much.
So I guess the next step for BMP route event logging is a working group call for adoption.
Yes, exactly.
All right. So that's the second to-do item.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Then we proceed to Jeffrey Haas. Would you honor us at the front of this room and talk about BGP escape rooms?
BGP escape rooms might be more fun than this. So, with apologies to many of you, this is the second of 3 presentations of this topic, which is yet to appear on the screen. I'm not about to reprise the entirety of IEPG, but...
Oh, wait. These might be the wrong slides.
Oh, you uploaded the IEPG chair slides.
I did.
Hold on. So again, I'm not going to reprise that, but if you're looking for an easy access, the IDR page does have them as well.
Okay. I don't know why yours is the weird.
So for the first part of the escape room for BGP is getting past Chris.
Yeah. Oh, man. Something renames the slides when we upload them. It's the worst.
I know it's the human that's operating it.
All right.
No.
Let's
Keep going. I'll find the slides.
Hey, I can't actually do this. So
Yeah?
as a prelude, so like, why am I actually shopping this around multiple working groups? I apologize for taking your time sometimes across 3 of them. If you're going to all 3 sessions, IDR is next. BGP has this interesting headache where routes that actually are carried around the net have extensions, as part of the path attributes. BGP has been very successful with its extension mechanism, and as a consequence, it's, as I just said, been BGP4 for many, many years. We just keep on adding on new features, and this has worked out great in some circumstances. In other circumstances, it has failed to work out well at all. The consequence here is that when it does go wrong, it can be anything from misrouting, accidental information disclosure, and I'm going to be framing this piece of the talk from an operational context for this crowd. I'll have a protocol version of the talk off the exact same material at IDR, but as operators, you care about disclosure. Have I accidentally leaked out something that's important that could be used to, maybe intuit what's going on in my network, maybe be used to attack my network? And sometimes the attributes themselves have problems. So we're trying to figure out exactly one part, what do we do in IETF about talking about this? Because these are inherent and intrinsic properties.
We're
Almost. These are inherent properties of the protocol that have been there the entire time. And we didn't have any way of discussing how these things can potentially be bad. So one purpose of this draft, especially for the operational crowd, and eventually this will go to NANOG, I think, maybe version 2, is to talk about what is the operational impact of attribute escape. These things that are attached to BGP and go further for some definition of further than they're supposed to. This is where I'm really going to pause and wait for them to vote.
Okay, now this time I really got it.
This time for sure.
This time for positives.
Presto.
It has your name in it this time, so. There.
Or some other orifice. There we go. Okay, next slide. So what is attribute escape? It sounds like, again, escape room. We're making it seem like you're breaking out of the BGP jail. And it's certainly a nice visual analogy to use for it. But really, this is closer to letting your golden retriever off its lead, and it wanders down the park where you aren't actually, keeping mind of it. And this is mostly because this is not always happening for bad reasons. This happens because the protocol is behaving in most cases as it should. Sometimes operator hasn't configured something right, but in most cases, this is something that we don't actually have any control over because of the way the feature is built or implemented. Next slide, please. Again, why am I writing this? It's because BGP RFCs talk about here's this new feature, here's this new attribute, here's its scoping. And we have to talk about how propagation works in these things, but for the most part, it devolves back to core RFC behaviors. The individual drafts often are good about talking about what they're for and where they're expected and where cleanup is supposed to happen in circumstances where cleanup is expected. The trouble is the intrinsic behaviors, especially on implementations that don't understand a feature, can't actually help you keep things where they belong. BGP is not designed for that sort of thing. So one part of this is just simply documenting this and socializing it among operators and potentially the mitigations, so that we can have a conversation about this and make sure that as we design new documents or provide operational advice to networks of how to actually maintain things, that these issues are being paid attention to. Next slide, please. So what's the actual problem here? Well, the problem is what happens if you attach something that can do something weird? If you are very big into segment routing and I've turned this feature on and we have this prefix SID that floats around your network and gets out and gets into another network where you're running prefix SIDs and it gets into your network and you haven't appropriately filtered. Huge flashing warnings in every segment routing document. You must filter, you must do all these things that people mostly aren't. What happens? Well, you get misrouting, misforwarding, bad things happen. Or you do something like run tunnel encapsulation, and it says that when I have this thing attached, I'm going to redirect my traffic across the GRE tunnel, which maybe it's going across to some other provider because it came in across things and wasn't scrubbed out. Or you might have some sort of thing that's attached to a VPN feature that has interesting effects. An easy example of that might be the link bandwidth. You've actually either restricted or overly given bandwidth to routes in your network. As operators, you care about all these things because they impact forwarding and it impacts troubleshooting. So how do we actually do these things? That's hard. Where things get truly evil is where you actually have route selection gets negatively impacted because a feature is partially implemented in your network. Some portion of your IBGP net mesh understands something that impacts route selection. Some pieces don't. Get the magic attribute in, and you start pointing other directions, and you've got nice forwarding loops. Congratulations, you just caused an escalation, and it's hard to troubleshoot. Next slide, please. And certainly we have things that are strong motivators from the operator community. We had the infamous attribute 128 incident, which motivated the updated error handling procedures for BGP. This actually caused sessions to go down. And well, that one was caused specifically by version A and version B of the feature cross-interacting with attribute escape happening because, if you don't understand the thing, you can't filter it. And that caused, if you're running the old BGP procedures, to knock down your neighbor's session, even though the damage came from far away. The problem is you may have actual optional transitive nonsense of something that, supposed to be your feature. It arrives in your network. It isn't your feature. And it's just as bad as somebody actually directly attacked that router across, the network. So error handling is there to help us catch these things, or at the very least not crash. But the bigger issue is, why did these things get to us in the first place? Next slide. So easy examples out of recent history. There's this entropy label feature Juniper made. Let's go ahead and ship this RFC 6790 piece. And it had no scoping in there. They screwed up and very quickly issued an updated RFC that says, we deprecate this thing. Don't do this thing. If you do it, you're going to have problems. And in parallel, we had our internal loops. We had somebody who was working on version 2 of this and left it on the same damn code point. This sounds like Adder 128. Yes, let's go blame Juniper for this. We accept the blame. But that said, for the most part, it just worked for us as long as we were in isolation. But oops, somebody decided they wanted to implement 6790 anyway. And if this was inside of a single network, you wouldn't think that's a problem. What actually happens is it did exactly what we were afraid of. It escaped, and we started having issues where Juniper boxes were falling over because, yes, we screwed up our code, but this thing is coming from far away, unlike it's supposed to. So this is a example. The escape does actually happen. We actually have the fix for this, and one of the classes mitigation we'll be talking about a little bit later, for the next top capability. So we realize this is a problem. We have the idea of at least one piece of the solution. We'll get to that in a moment. Next slide, please. Another recent example, the BEST working group is working on these nice procedures for interoping EVPN and layer 3 VPNs. And they're providing some extra loop information or loop prevention mechanisms via the TPAth feature, because you're literally stripping one domain's information to another. The AS paths are no longer your feature that's supposed to save you from these things. They threw this path thing in there, and in a closed user group that has these features interacting together, this should be great and wonderful, except for the fact that, oops, layer 3 VPNs touch the outside world via the internet, and we get escape for these things if they don't know that's happening here. And in this case, this one is impactful on route selection. Not only does this cause problems with preferential of your route, preferencing for your routes, it can cause black holes if you get in there, and really, really evil. If you're a data center that's using this feature and it's caused something to escape, that route from your data center is now the least preferable route in the internet for that prefix. You have just lost money. This is not a happy thing. This is a good example of a family scoping type thing, and what do we do about that? Again, back to the conversation a little bit later on. Next slide. So really what this conversation is about scoping. BGP doesn't really have a strong sense of that. We have a couple of things that are common practices that we try to encode in our specs. AS level scoping is the core thing that we tend to do. Most things live in IBGP land. They're supposed to fall at the border. Well, for things that have potential for escape, if we put a hint inside of the attribute that we're trying to create that this is a scoping AS or scoping set of ASs, this is one way for, at least if it escapes, you can decide, does this really matter for me or not? So that's one thing we could potentially do. And this was part of the discussion, but not the implementation for the BGP open policy stuff in RFC 9234 recently. As operators, I encourage you to go look at that, and that'll keep your people in security happy as part of the evolution of BGP security solutions. The other things are often next top scoping. The example we gave earlier, for the entry label is really a feature that should be bound to next tops, and not only should be bound to a specific next top set, but if you receive this as escape, it's nice to know that it doesn't apply to you. You can throw the thing away. And the next top capability encodes that behavior, so the next top is embedded. Consistent route selection, this one's a lot trickier. We don't have a solid answer for this full set of things at all at the moment. We're starting to have this conversation a little bit in the DPath domain, but this is going to take a lot longer conversation. This draft is not here to say we have the full answer. This is to make sure we have consistent vocabulary to talk about this being a problem, draw people's attention to it, and make sure that we start having this broader conversation, ideally operational community along with protocol designers. Next slide. So at the operational end of things, we've known for years, and then I pointed out during IPG that Randy Bush has given wonderful presentations, multiple times over the years with his various research groups about the bad things communities can do if you're not cleaning house. And we have examples from standard 1997 communities. We have now large BGP communities that can do these things. We even have IPv6 communities that we can do. The standard communities is mostly about cleanup. Randy's documented those things very well. Extended communities are largely there for VPN signaling, but they have cleanup issues just the same. And some of those actually can impact how your traffic's been dealt with, link bandwidth being the example I bring up earlier. We need to be able to clean these things up. We do actually have guidance in RFC 7454 about how to clean some of these things up. Part of what we need is a way of having better vendor tools to help with these cleaning operations. So this is one part the vendors can do a good job. This is also about operators following better practices. Next slide. So the other reason to have this conversation is sometimes this is not about oops. These things, when they go wrong and have network impacts, can be maliciously exploited. This is a scary land we live in, and this is a motivation for vendors to tighten up their error handling code. This is a call for the operational community to use and update your stuff to the most current releases, especially when security issues are present. And this is also, if you have optional security mechanisms, make sure they're turned on when appropriate. Next slide. So part of the thing that we're discussing, this also strongly impacts the operational community, and it's really going to be a big motivation for our nano conversation at some point, is how do you mitigate this thing? Well, one of the things is that you potentially can explicitly filter path attributes. The gotcha is if you do this, you are harming the incremental deployment of new BGP features that has been so helpful for the growth of the internet the entire time. So we have this set of tensions of, do we let features continue to evolve, or do we take a security mindset where we're trying to be very protectful of ourselves? Where this matters can change your opinion. If you're a stub AS, you can lock down the house. I don't need to let anything else through. If I'm just a data center and these things are meant to be locked at the outside world, you can choose which features you want to let in or out. But if you're a transit ISP of some sort, there's a strong argument that you probably should not be doing these filters, but you still have to be mindful of your protection. So this is going to be a longer discussion with especially the core operator community. Ideally, we have easy mode profile for scrubbing things. If you turn on a feature, that should also turn on the scrubbing mechanisms. That's not how most of the routing stacks implement these things. People are very good about putting knobs into the system. That's great and very helpful if you actually turn them on appropriately. And sometimes the people that are coding the features haven't thought about the operational consequences. So this is a dialogue back to the vendors. How do we make sure that things can be operated in a safe fashion? One of our questions is, now that we're sort of having this conversation and we've written these considerations down, what do we do in terms of the IETF documents to bring these things to people's attention? Does these practices as a set go into security considerations? Are they operational considerations, or are they something new? So let's figure out where they go in the document, and part of this is going to probably pop up as discussion in IDR, and that will flow to other groups like BESS and such. Next slide. So what's the next steps here? Certainly the next step is to give you exactly the same presentation with a slightly different bend in IDR. That's a place where you can catch up in your sleep if you like. The other thing is just simply socialize this idea. So we talk about this, people are aware of it, they're thinking about it as being a problem. This means places like BESS, which I'm not presenting at this IETF, their agenda is full, but version 2 of this document will probably go there for presentation next IETF. Same thing, a flavor of this conversation will be expanded out and be taken on the operational circuit, discuss things like nanogs. We're also going to have the conversation, what does IDR want to do with this thing? This is a very conversational document that I knocked off at 4 hours on a Sunday, just before the 0-0 lockdown. where do we clean it up? Do we use this as a generic problem statement and this is where it goes? Or do we actually expand the scope of this to have the normative procedures we're going to be recommending? So we'll figure those things out. And again, appealing to what this room's here for, from an operational perspective, think about how these things impact you. What do you want to actually see the people specifying protocol components do to help you out on this? And end of the day, this may impact things like our air handling procedures. And ideally, we publish this as some flavor of RFC so that it stays in people's knowledge and is used as common practice. Questions? And you can speak from the microphone here if you like.
Somewhat related to this, I've been speaking with a number of European Internet Exchange operators who operate very, very large route servers, because I am one of the people that has to keep those things working. And originally, there were standard communities, then 32-bit ASNs arrived. Then people thought, oh crap, we can't fit 32 bits into a 16-bit field. And then people started using extended communities as a sort of hack to manipulate route propagation on route servers. Then this hack was observed by me and the cowboys, and we brought large communities to the world. And now we have all of classic extended and large communities in production environments. And this leads to extremely unwieldy routing policy configurations, because for each type of community, that blows up into config. So the European Internet Exchange route server operators were like, hey, maybe we can get rid of extended communities altogether at public Internet Exchange route servers, because it reduces memory pressure and configuration burden. And indeed, one of the arguments, so aside from the computational resources that it would save us in that particular type of environment, we also noticed that all the extended communities that we do see either are because people have not yet jumped to large communities, or are layer 3 VPN private information leakage.
Crash.
So I expect that we'll try and formulate this best current practice in a draft, and maybe reference your work here as well.
And vice versa.
Yeah. Well, I guess that was not my question, but my contribution.
Trash exists. Let's actually clean it up.
Michael Abrahamson. So the work that was done, I think, Joe, you were one of them, about if you don't configure a prefix policy or a routing policy on a neighbor, that it's now closed. Should we continue along that line and start to talk about, okay, BGP, error handling should be on by default? Does this kind of filtering and so on, should that happen by default, and start to push the vendors towards doing the same thing out of the box? Is that an avenue that we want to, do we want to go down that line and try to make the vendors have sensible defaults out of the box? I know you were very happy about not getting any kind of pushback on your changing the defaults and blah, blah, blah.
I love changing defaults, but this gentleman was like, no, Joe.
And I love changing defaults too, but I work for a company that's, I'm going to outright says, has cowardly management in many respects to not wanting to change them, because it causes phones to ring when you do that. So, we have tensions like that in older operational implementations. We have that even in new features about maintaining current practices. You go to 7606, it says you do need to do all these things as a must. Do you truly support 7606 if it's on by default or by switch? And honestly, the right answer is, this is the standard operator torches and pitchfork type thing. The operators can certainly have strong opinions about these things and show up at their vendors' doors and keep pushing the up button until things change.
But anyway, the idea about doing a BCP of, okay, you're now being a transit provider of some kind, please do list of things, and perhaps and then market that at the network operator groups. It sounds like a good idea.
Yeah, and I'm going to throw into this very specific use case for the route servers. The purpose of route servers is localized traffic exchange. You don't normally expect something that is passing through a route server to propagate further on, and most IXPs, as best I know, they have contracts to say you shall not do this. This means that an IXP actually has it within their purview to say these things that might be used for downstream signaling that are out of scope for pulling standard internet traffic, as an example, you're not allowed to do that. That is a contractual matter.
Yes, but then we should probably advise them on what not to let through.
Exactly.
Hi, Ben, welcome online. So I think this is really useful. Even if it only winds up being a description of the problem and give us kind of a framework to think about it in and communicate with other operators about when it happens, it's useful even in that sense. In its current form, the title of the draft suggests it's targeting IDR. And in its current form, I'm not sure that makes a lot of sense because it doesn't have much in the way of actual BGP protocol in it. But regardless, I assume that if it stays that way and it stays kind of mostly operational guidance, you'll rethink that and it'll probably wind up being here, would be my guess.
Also, to give an example, it does actually mention the 3 mitigations methods that have been sort of pervasively discussed. So each of those things, if they go from saying, well, we've talked about or have examples of putting in scoping ASs, scoping next stops, that sort of thing, that is advice to how you actually implement the protocol, how you design the protocol. That piece is definitely addressed towards IDR and BES. It is very likely in its current form, it's probably going to stay some flavor of informative, where things might actually change process-wise, and this is up to the chairs that actually end up blessing the thing and their associated ADs. If we actually put in a equivalent of a management considerations section that says you need to have these things as templates for BGP related feature before the RFC editor will accept them, that I think bumps the status around as well.
So, okay, that makes sense. I suppose, and one possible suggestion that occurred to me while I was sitting there, so I haven't had a chance to think this through properly, is there's this kind of the transitivity of attributes is overloaded in a kind of unhelpful way. It simultaneously says it may propagate, it's allowed to be transitive, and it must be transitive by default if you don't know what it is. And I think the kind of probably slightly dirty but quite useful solution to that would be almost just partitioning the attribute namespace into kind of a high section and a low section, and assigning from one of those, so the implementation doesn't necessarily need to know exactly what the attribute is, but it can tell just from the numerical range, if I don't understand this, should I burn it with fire or should I allow it to pass freely? Because then it just becomes an allocation question and the authors of new features can take a sane judgment. And that probably doesn't require an actual protocol change.
It requires minimally a registry change. It requires a recommendation to protocol procedures that would be normative. That's a potential valid mitigation for this. Let's talk about that further. Rudiger?
Yeah, Rüdiger Volk. I was burned back then with the 128 in really bad ways. And after that experience, I tend to be in the very conservative hygiene part of the community. And if I think about it, kind of you are proposing, well, okay, please do not filter strictly to enable development. How about the idea that actually applying strict hygiene and doing reporting that something hitting the filters is occurring, and having an operational approach where one checks, is this something that is actually well defined, or is this the KGB doing a strange BGP attribute communication of some secret command to destroy some part of the world? At least I think for Paolo's part of work, actually looking at how to make sure that it is easy to detect something strange showing up.
Exactly. So hitting many of your points. The first one, we're gonna have to upgrade, your protocol a little bit. It hasn't been KGB for years. It's FSB. But far more than that. So the points about visibility is a big piece of this. So that's a good option for the documentation. A internal discussion, which I'll expose here, is that when you're dealing with things that are unusual, if your code is proceeding through 76006 type procedures, do you keep the attribute of doom, or do you throw it into the trash before you do anything? That can impact whether it shows up in things like BMP. If you've thrown it away, you can't report upon it. It shows up basically in more of your syslog type counters. So keeping counters of I've seen the weird thing becomes important. So end of the day, this is how do we do telemetry for these things? And expanding on the point effectively Ben's making about scoping by default. It's like if your former employer filtered by default, eventually people start for new features having to avoid you as a transit provider because you can't provide the service. This eventually becomes a money problem for you as well, because BGP is about policy, policy is about money. So eventually we have to figure out what is the balance that we can do. As you're saying, even if you don't understand things, if it is part of the operational toolkit, that people simply have filters that they have that if I'm ignorant of this feature, this is permitted, this is denied, I can do this across my AS without understanding the thing. This at least gives you the option to incrementally turn things on in a more safe fashion. Robert.
Yeah, Robert Nashrook. So I have 3 comments. One comment is to the Ben's idea about dividing the attribute space. I don't think it will work, because the same very attribute may be by one operator fine to be sent across his network to his peers upstreams, and by the others may not, right? So that idea to statically define something may not work at all. Second comment is, I'm actually surprised, Jeff, that you didn't provide on the slides some solutions. If you're going to repeat the same in IDR, that's fine. But I would say, let's say, using very simple attribute AS radius, numerical, and measuring this across the AS path, I mean, at the boundary, maybe universal way as one low-hanging fruit example, right? And the last one, actually, Rudiger took over and almost said the same. Today, even if you have make mistakes in your policy, if you are a good operator, you don't want to send CRAB around, you don't know if you send it around or not. So some form of even young model extensions to indicate that your policy still leaked some attributes which were not supposed to leak. And it's actually operational. So maybe GROW, it's actually a good working group for this kind of discussion work proposals. In general, a number of customers I have been talking with in the past and currently complain that BGP doesn't have a BGP history database. You have some implementation, some based on the BMP offline and so on. This could be another way to look at the problem.
Okay, so hitting the points one at a time. The suggestion from Ben, you're correct. Old implementations will certainly not respect the new rules, but incrementally deploying them is still a potentially viable way to limit the blast radius as the new rules take effect. If that's an example. So this is a case where BGP's incremental extensions still play out. To the point about telemetry, we'll be having better things. Again, that's, I think, a very valuable solution. Do these things end up in like the IETF BGP Yang module? That's an example. They absolutely will end up in counter-like infrastructure one way or the other, and certainly BMP is a great way to expose that sort of thing. As to solutions, well, my choice was, when I was writing this in 4 hours on Sunday, I was going to offer the 3 easy observations of here's things that we've already talked about and have shown up in a lot of different forms. And one of these includes, it's mentioned in the draft, generic extensions to the path attributes to provide scoping. And we took this as wisdom from wide communities originally. Being able to do this would make sense. It's technically an IDR draft, but nobody's proceeded with it. And sort of the discussion among that set of authors was, we're probably only going to see the deployment of that if we actually go to BGP 5. So we have challenges. I can only boil the ocean 1 liter at a time, so we'll go from there. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you, Jeff. Next up, Pierre.
Sorry, shared.
Oh,
Yeah, it's
so I should not
right
press.
ahead of you. Okay. It's good.
So hello.
It's right.
Yep, the right ones. Hopefully.
Oh, he's a premium Grow member, so
But he paid
surfaces
$8 a
to
month.
right.
All right.
All right, take it
So,
away. Thank you.
I'm Pierre-François from Lyon. I'll present a quick update on the BMP log peer draft. So next slide, please. So I'll remind quickly what we're doing now. I'll summarize the feedback that we received, present the updates, and I'll open the room for debate. Next slide. So RFC 9069 provides us a view on the local RIB with BMP. And for some reason, the peer address field in the per peer header in lockrib is 0 field. So basically, you don't know from which peer you received that pass that you installed in your local RIB, which is a little unfortunate. It requires the operator to dig in the data, especially in the case where you receive that pass with that pass, or if you have a BGP multipass. And well, it's really, really unfortunate because in most BMP code, this information is readily available. It's a matter of deciding to advertise it. So we would like to do this. Next slide, please. So the draft was initially opening 2 options. Either we update 9069 and we say that we are going to allow the peer address field to be non-zero field. And so the default behavior would be to keep it 0 field, and through a config, the operator could allow the BMP implementation to actually set that field. Or we would leverage the BMP v4, shall I call it this way, draft in order to introduce a new TLV that would let us basically describe the peer address in that new TLV. And by doing that, we are also backward compatible because collectors not recognizing that TLV would just ignore it as per the definition of BMP TLV. So next slide, please. So the feedback that I received was, well, it was not a no from Jeff counting as 10 no's, but it was an I'm scared feedback from Jeff. So I counted as 5 no's basically. So yeah, we realized that updating 9069 might be nice on paper, but it might make things a little bit more complicated for the developers who were not anticipating this in their current implementation of BMP lockrib. And if the collector is a bit naive as well, and the operators does some mistake, we might break things. So, okay, I'll let you guys decide, but maybe this was not the right option. Next slide, please. We had another very valid point that if I imported this pass from a VRF, yeah, it's nice to have, so I'm in my current local RIB, I advertise that pass, I talk about that pass in BMP, and I tell you from which peer I received it, but if that pass was imported from another VRF, well, that peer address is described in, we don't know which context, right? And so if I do not disclose from which pass this, from which VRF this pass was received, then this peer address is not of any use. So that's very true. So we made an update to the draft in order to deal with this. Next slide, please. Yeah. So the Rx peer address TLV is the same. So it's the TLV where you have where we describe the address of the peer from which we received that pass, sorry. And then we introduced 3 new TLVs, all optional, one with the code previous VRF, origin VRF, and VRF name sequence. I'll explain all of them. So next slide. So the previous VRF name TLV is basically a TLV that tells you I'm in the current VRF and I'm telling you about this pass, and I actually imported that pass from this previous VRF where this pass was lying. I don't need to add a new TLV to describe in which current VRF I am because this is already provided by 1969. So next slide. The next TLV is the origin VRF name, and it basically tells you in which VRF you received that pass originally, or where this pass was self-originated if it was a pass that was originated locally on the router. So basically, if you received the pass from in a VRF customer 1, and it was imported into global and then into V, and you're currently doing lockrib on VRF V, well, the origin VRF name for that TLV for that pass will be customer 1. And so thanks to this, with the peer address, you can finally know where this pass was coming from. Next one, please. So if as a vendor, you really, really want to make life easy for your operator, you can also simply, there are some implementations where I know it's going to be complicated. There are some implementations for which it's just a matter of tapping onto a list, but you could simply describe the chain of VRF through which that pass traveled inside your box and give this information in one single BMP message. Right. So thanks to this, we do not need to correlate among the BMP messages that we have to know where this pass was coming from, and we see the life of the pass all across the different VRFs on the BGP process. But devs won't like it, I know, so obviously this is optional. We do not need, next slide please, we do not need this to be, to have the job done. So it's convenient, but not really necessary. Next slide please. So for self-originated prefixes, you explicitly use that TLV, the peer address TLV, and you set it to 0. So there is no more ambiguity with the peer address. Is it 0 because it's self-originated, or is it 0 because no one is set it? No. If you use that TLV and you leave it to 0, so if you actually include it, that means that it was self-originated in the corresponding VRF that we describe in the other TLV. Next slide, please. So first feedback I received, VRF name to identify VRF sucks. I received that 30 minutes ago. I let you guys decide if you want to use something else. I just wanted to be consistent with RFC 9069, which uses VRF names. It can be debated. I'm fine changing this if needed. We only need the origin VRF TLV. If you want to strip all the other ones, because that's the only thing that we actually need for the purpose of resolving the peer from which we received that pass. I'm fine with this, but well, the previous VRF TLV is, I think, pretty useful too. And so I have a question to the working group is, shall I completely cancel the idea of updating 9069 and the peer address field, leave it as it is? Jeff, you said no, but you were the one not wanting to do that last time. So go to the mic, please. Next slide, please.
I believe Tim Evans wants to speak to us.
Yeah, 3, 4 people. Ooh.
Tim Evans. So yeah, I just want to address the peer address. Local RIB was always intended to advertise.
Would you mind pointing the microphone towards?
Does this work? All right.
Tim Evans.
Tim Evans. Yes. Cisco. So the peer address was 0 because it didn't apply, and I still don't think it does apply. I think what you're describing and some of the challenges that you want to add to local RIB is more information around what the local RIB doesn't always have.
True.
So I think a TLV does make sense to do that. I think it's a misuse to use peer address because it's confusing, and peer address never conveyed enough information about the peer for the collector, and the collector may not even be getting that peer information, so it may know nothing about that peer. So a TLV, in my opinion, is the right way to go. But anyhow.
Fine by me.
Ahmed Al-Hassani from Swisscom. I'm going to contrast him a bit. So I understand all the message types in BNB have the peer address there. So it would be nice to have it there as well, not to be exceptional for one type of messages. And also understand that might be not good for BNB v3. Keep it as it is. We don't need to update it. But anyway, in BNB v4, we have a new version. Anyway, like your collector and producer have to be updated. So you can also have time to clean this up. If you want to add additional information about the VRFs and so on, that's fine if you add as a TLV because that's optional, that's extra, that you can add it in TLVs. But I hate to see like a bunch of bytes that are always 0 and sent all the time for no use. Like in some type messages we are using and some other are just not used at all. For 3, okay, for 4, we have a chance to clean things up.
Agreed.
Jeff Oz, I'm here to agree with many of the points that were just made. So we don't want to change the old one. We have code that's currently using it. It is causing pain for our customers. So solving the problem is worth doing. We have the opportunity to do it in a new message for non-backward compatible ways. So think about what that should be. What is the greenfield idea you build knowing what you know now is what you should be asking. This includes the extensibility. So I wouldn't recommend overloading things, but fixing the problem would be nice. But moving to the other piece here about the route leakage type stuff. I can see implementations wanting to know how to do that or where the origins of things come. Where that leads you is an interesting set of dark paths, because eventually, how do the various implementations handle where the routes are passing through the system? Do they have one level of leakage?
That's why I said some implementation. It might be easy for some implementation. I know it won't be easy for some other. So I want to open the option to do that if your BGP and BMP code allow for it to easily provide that. If you cannot, well, so
yeah, and so I'm going to pick on this from 2 layers specifically. So like our implementation, we only allow 1 leak, so we can tell you exactly where the thing's originating. This is not a big deal. What I have a little bit more concern about is BMP was our sort of origin for talking about rib in, rib out in a more formal way and what loc-rib actually means. So GROW accidentally became the source of truth for some of these things. The leakage discussions are also in the same level of mess. One way to view the leakage for rib in, for loc-rib is the rib in this circumstance for this route fundamentally attached to the same context? Is it in the original VRF? Now, how do you have the traceability for these things? So the question you're eventually starting to ask is, do I have traceability of this as it flows to the system, potentially through many tables? Before you go wanting to add this in as a core piece of functionality, do yourself a favor and work through that.
It's a valid question.
Thomas Graf from Swisscom. I just want to say thank you very much. I think that's very valuable what you're doing here, especially bringing visibility into dynamic route leaking. That's something currently missing in BMP.
Okay.
Hi, this is Kargi. So I agree with the point Jeff made about traceability, and that's one of the reasons why I feel not just the origin TLV, but the import information and also the peer address field. It's important, especially for debuggability and traceability, because maybe this VRF was not supposed to import it, and the misconfiguration happened on a certain device, but not on another. So having all of them, when things go wrong, it makes it a lot easier to pinpoint.
I agree. If we, Jeff, one question, well, a question to the audience, actually. If we would decide to, an implementation that would decide to not bring the origin VRF TLV, that sets the peer address, shall we say that we must not set it if that IP address is not in that same routing context, or we are kind of misleading collection, right?
Well, so the conversation you're having, that you're getting advice for, is in BMP v3, you have this field that we're sort of overloading with context, and it's not working out because it's not good enough.
Let's forget about it.
That's
Yeah.
fine. So we talk about BMP version X. What should it look like? Well, in that case, we wouldn't put in this ambiguous pure address. We did that because that was an optimization to hack it into locrib from what we already had. Screw that. We'll do the right thing. But now the right thing becomes, are we tracking leakability of these things? One of the things I'm going to suggest is, and I think Gargi is agreeing with me. I'm not sure. Part of what we're discussing in the context when we're looking at these things as an operator is partially traceability. This thing is coming from here. Here's the history of the routes passing through. Does that actually help me without the necessary related correlation on the rib out sort of side of rib leaking from that piece of the model? So like I said, what you're effectively asking the question of is, do I have traceability of a route from the minute it pops into any BGP session on the box, or from local static configuration and then bounces around? And for locrib in particular, one of the things that there's ambiguity about spec-wise and GROW hasn't fully converged on. Locrib, is that the active BGP route, because that's what's in the 4271 RFC? Or is it the route that is the active route because that may be passing into my rib out? We have a long debate about these sort of things. We don't have clean answer, and I don't think we have universal agreement in implementations right now. So for that piece, a source of truth, is this thing come from BGP? Is this come from another protocol? That I think is actually a bigger annotation that most people want than what VRF it came from.
You had a question about word group adoption?
Yeah.
You should definitely email the list.
Will do.
All right,
So
last up.
one quick comment on that, right? I think it would be useful to have both, not just like which VRF it came from, what peer it came from, but also what protocol it came from, whether it's the local rib, it's BGP transported, or some IGP imported into that VRF. Because when misconfigurations happen, it's very easy for them to happen, but it's like really long time to troubleshoot and pinpoint.
Okay. Ben, you have 23 seconds.
Oh, really? Okay, cool. I can do this actually. So.
Ben has a
I thought I had 20 seconds for the next one. Okay.
You are Pierre. He is Ben.
Sorry.
You sure?
Well, I'm going to be Maxence in a minute. So.
Did that count as part of my 23 seconds? That's not fair. I want to just attempt an answer at the question I think you just asked and didn't really receive a response to, which kind of boiled down to, is it worse to put potentially ambiguous information into that field than nothing at all? And I think that is definitely the case. I think the rule, if the shape of the protocol ends up being the same, I think the rule would need to be, if the peer is not in the same address as you're exporting local rib for, then zero it, or you must attach the TLV to tell you which VRF it did come from.
Fully with you, Ben. Or Pierre. Yeah. Okay, so I'll speak for Maxence. It's 2 a.m. He's following from his bed, so he will just fix if I'm saying something stupid. So what I'm going to do now is we have a project to improve BMP implementation in FR routing. And so Maxence has done a huge amount of work on that topic. So we have BMP, all the RFCs you all know, BMP at rib in, log rib, at rib out, a bunch of statistics. And currently, up until recently, FR routing only has basic support for BMP. And so the project is, with the support from Swisscom, is to support all RFCs and to also experiment with the ongoing GROW working group documents. And obviously code the dissectors in order to be able to figure out what the heck we're doing. Yeah, next slide, please. So the initial status of FR routing was the following. We had a partial support of adribin, so it was working, but without pass support, and no locrib, no adrib out, no support for BMP v4 and TLVs, and no pass marking. And so the idea was to go through all these additional RFCs. Next slide, please. So Maxence added ATPass support. We have an ATPass ARX ID in the an LRI in an adribin pass, and we have the identification of the VRF as per the 7854. Next slide, please. We have LockRib with the support of BGP multipass and the identification of the VRF. We had a bunch of challenges there. Next slide, please. So implementation experience there, we have a slide. Performance impact, because with BMP multipass, we have to compare two sets of pass instead of just one. And so, yeah, if we dig deep, we can see that there is a little impact on this. We also have a issue on the collection side, is that without the draft I've just talked about, the pass ID that we expose, which would be the ATPass ID that we received, or from which we received the pass, is meaningless because we don't know from which peer it was. And as the scope of an ATPass ID is the peer with which we received the pass, we cannot just interpret this pass. So yeah, we can give it, but without the update without giving the peer inside LockRib, you cannot do anything with this. Or else we can regenerate this ID, so create a new ID whose scope would be the local RIB of the router, but then we lose the link with the adribin with whom we get that pass. So there is a bit of a dilemma here, and we're trying to solve this. Next slide, please. We support adribot with that pass and VRF identification, same way. Yeah, the shameful slide. Next slide, please. So I made fun of a vendor 10 years ago for doing this, and now I'm there. Yeah. So in FR routing, we do not explicitly maintain a pre-policy reboot. So it just disappears, right? I mean, it goes into post-policy reboot, but you do not have actually a structure where you have your pre-policy reboot. And so when we do a reconfig of an inbound policy, and the decision process goes through it, we actually don't know what it was in pre-policy reboot. And so if we activate ATPass reboot pre-policy, well, we have nothing to compare with, right? If it's changed in the outbound policy, then we cannot compare with what would be on ATPass on a BMP reboot post policy. And so sometimes we send updates of pass that do not change, and we see it on the collector, and yeah, we're ashamed. We're sorry. We could fix this, but it's in the FR routing code, it's work, right? And there are some statistics that, due to this as well, cannot be done without a huge resource impact. So, yeah, to be honest with you, I'm not sure what we are going to do. If we are going to just leave it like that, I don't know. The users of FR routing will tell us. Next slide, please. So for the BMP TLV draft, we added the BGP PDUs in the route monitoring messages. The code is ready to advertise group TLV code and capability capability TLVs, but we have no feature inside FR routing using them. So the code is ready, but nothing is using it. Next slide, please. For pass marking, we have almost everything. So most status and all the reason codes. We are ready to do the EBIT draft from Paolo, but it's not needed in FR routing. So it's ready if someone would fork FR routing and want to use it. But currently it's just there, but we're not using it. At the moment, we did the planning for Maxence's work. Route origin validation was not available, so I had not put it in the list. Now it's kind of feasible, but it will require some time. And we do not have backup and best external in FR routing, so we don't use that marking. Yeah, there are. Yeah, you can get the slides and go to the dissectors if you want to test all of this. We have a pull request for BMP local RIB. The pull request process on FR routing is voilà. I'll stay polite and I let the mimicking of the developer reaction to it. So yeah, I don't know what to do about this. You can come help us in the process if you want to. And yeah, if you want to test this, do interrupt testing. We do it quite a bunch in the lab at Swisscom. If you want to come play with us, feel free to contact us. Thank you. I think that's it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Right.
Come.
Right on time.
Voilà.
Questions?
Well, I just have some compliments. I think working towards running code to test the implementability and interoperability of standards like BMP is phenomenal work. So
thank you, Maxence.
Exactly. Too bad the person themselves.
He will be
not,
there in Prague. Yeah.
He's going to be there in Prague.
Yeah, yeah.
Or Dave.
Cool. Promised.
Pierre, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Everyone, I think this concludes the GROW meeting at IETF 116. The next time we 117, excellent. Off by one, never happens. The next one is IETF 118 in Prague, and we hope to see you there. Thank you all for attending, and have a wonderful day.
We got time for questions? We got time for questions?
Yeah, sure.
I need to go to the little person's room.
Oh, okay.
Where do you want to meet?
Lobby?
Lobby it is. So you know
Probably I'll either be outside with Ben smoking a cigarette or in